Okay. Okay. Today we'll be studying about the adequacy criteria. Okay. So just one of you can just acknowledge me that you can just mute the screen. Whether the screen is visible to you, one can acknowledge. Screen is visible. Please put in the chat box whether the screen is visible for everybody. Okay, fine. Then we'll move on. Good. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. We'll just move on with the content. Okay, what are the objectives associated with this particular part of structural testing? Okay, here we are going to understand the purpose of having test adequacy criteria and the limitations associated with the adequacy criteria. Okay, then we are going to study the basic terminologies involved in test selection and as well as adequacy. Okay, and in this particular unit we are also going to know about the sources of information which are basically used for defining the adequacy criteria. Okay, and we are going to study about the relationship between the test selection as well as adequacy criteria in testing the software. These are the learning objectives with respect to the particular section that we are going to discuss further. Okay, so, what do you mean by adequacy? Okay, adequacy means for a particular software. Okay, try to understand the meaning of adequacy. Okay, it has to satisfy the specific thing that is been already defined. Okay, it has to pass through the set of tests or the minimum uh, definition or minimum suite of test cases in order to pass the testing phase. Okay, that we call it as adequacy. Okay, if the system is going through the adequate suite of test cases, then we can say that it is being built properly. Okay, but sometimes in the practical scenario, in the real world scenario, it is very hard to come up with the test suite. What do you mean by test suite? It is a set of test cases in order to come up with the proper adequacy criteria. Okay, that is, you have to define the particular uh, definition. I can say you have to come up with a certain definition in which the system that you are going to develop must pass that minimum criteria that I call it as adequacy criteria. And we have seen one example when we were studying about structural testing. For example, the adequacy criteria for statement testing or statement coverage is that at least one time each statement should be executed at least once whenever you execute a program. Okay, that means you have to write a test cases in such a way that okay at least one time the statements which are present in the code are getting executed. That is what I call it as a adequacy criteria. Okay, and they are also referred as design rules. Okay, but don't think that you have defined design rules and they are going to guarantee the good design. They are not at all related with each other. If you are defining the design rules, it doesn't mean that you are coming up with a good design. No. Good designs are basically dependent on the creativity, okay, and uh, the design rules, okay, they are entirely dependent on the designers. Okay, what we are designing exactly here, we are designing the test suite here. Okay, please. The focus here is to design or come up with a better test suite for testing purpose. Okay. After that, okay, uh, criteria which will identify inadequacies in the set of test cases. Okay, for example, you have a specification which is describing the different treatment in two test cases. Okay, but the test suite is not checking the cases which are in fact treated differently. Okay, the meaning here is that you have designed or you have come up with a test suite wherein test suite is having the two cases, but test suite is not checking, okay, whether the test cases that are included in the test suite are being treated differently or not. Okay, so you are not exactly differentiating the test cases that you have included within the test specification or test suite. Okay, and one more thing is that if no test in the test suite, it executes a particular program statement, then I can say that the particular test suite that I have designed is inadequate to detect the faults within the program. See, whenever you design a test suite, you have to be very thorough with the design. Okay, or whenever you are designing the test cases in order to form a test suite, you have to take care that it is going to execute against a particular program in order to detect the faults. The main objective is to come up with the faults. Okay, you discover faults by designing a proper test suite. Okay, if suppose there are no any test case within the test suite, that is not finding out or not executing a particular statement within the program, then I can say that that test suite is inadequate. Okay, that is what do you mean by inadequacy? Okay, inadequacy. After that, we have something called design rules. Okay, uh, just I will move on to these proper terminologies which are involved in the software testing. First and foremost, you should know about the meaning of test case. Okay, we have come across these terminologies more n number of times. We have come across this word, that is test case. What do you mean by test case? Test case will have set of inputs and the execution conditions and pass or fail criteria. That is, whether the system or the software is behaving as expected or not. I'm going to indicate via criteria, one of the criteria, that is either pass or fail. So test case is made up of three components. One is set of inputs, execution conditions, and pass or fail criteria. What do you mean by test case specification? Okay, it is a requirement to be satisfied by a test case, one or more than one test cases. Okay, test cases are guided by test case specification. Test case should adhere to the requirement defined. Okay, then I have one more terminology called a test obligation. Okay, it's a partial test case specification. Okay, wherein you are focusing on some property which is made most important in testing or carry out the testing of a particular software. That is what I call as a test obligation. It's a partial test case specification requiring some property as important criteria to carry out thorough testing. Okay. Then I have something called test suite, which is again set of test cases. Test or test execution. What do you mean by test execution? It is nothing but the activity of executing the test cases and evaluation of the results so obtained. Okay, and please make sure that test execution can be manual or automated, but nowadays it is completely automated. Okay, the activity of executing the test cases, I call it as a test execution or test. And again, one more important terminology, that is adequacy criteria. It is a predicate. Whenever you come across a predicate, it is nothing but a condition. Okay, that is true. True in the sense satisfied or false, not satisfied of a program and test suite pair. Okay, whenever you automate the testing process, the pair that you are going to consider is the program which is under study or which is under testing and the test suite that you have designed. Test suite is nothing but set of test cases. Okay, and you are going to have a condition wherein that condition is applied on this particular pair in order to get to know about whether it has been satisfied or not. That condition, I call it as adequacy criterion. Single adequacy criterion, singular. Okay, predicate is nothing but the condition that you are going to apply on a pair called program and test suite in order to get to know about whether that particular condition holds good or not. Okay, whether it is been satisfied or not. I call that as adequacy criteria. Okay, then where do I get these test obligations? Here, test obligation, you have to know the meaning of test obligation. It is a partial test specification requiring some property as important factor to perform thorough testing. Okay, where these obligations come from? These obligations come from functional, that is black box or specification based testing, okay, from software specification. One of the example can be if the specification requires robust recovery, that is quick recovery from the power failure. Okay, and how the test obligation will be. Test obligation should include simulated power failure. Okay, see, whenever you are dealing with the testing, most of the things are simulated over here. Okay, you need not have that scenario in the practically. Whenever you are performing the testing, you need to simulate it. Okay, so whenever the specification requires a robust recovery from the power failure, okay, you have to test whether a system can be recovered whenever there is a power failure instantly. Then how do you check it? Okay, test obligation should include simulated power failure. You have to have that situation, right? Then only you can test whether your system can be up instantly after the power failure or not. Okay, then after that, whenever I'm having structural, that is white or glass box testing, okay, then the example that they are taking up for test obligation is that it must include, you have to traverse through the program, that is, if you have loop within the code, you have to traverse it one or more number of times. This is just the example. Okay, then if it is model based, okay, wherein the focus is on model of the system. Okay, then models used in the specification or design are derived from the code. See, test obligations. What all are the things that you have to include within the test obligations are? You are going to include the models which are used in specification or design. Okay, and what is the associated example for this model based testing? You are going to exercise all the transitions in communication protocol model. Okay, whenever you are dealing with a model based, you are considering the state diagram over there. So the test obligations must include all the transitions exercising in communicating protocol model. Okay, if you have fault based, okay, then you are going to check for buffer overflow handling. Okay, so these three things you have to know. Where do these test obligations come from? What are the sources? Okay, whenever I have different testing techniques, suppose if I'm carrying out functional testing, then where do I get it and what is the example for test obligation? If I'm performing structural testing, where do I get the test obligation? And if it is model based, if it is fault based testing, these are testing techniques and you have to write how do you write the test obligations and what are the things that you have to include within the test obligation. Okay, next very important point that you have to know is about adequacy criteria. So adequacy criteria, it is nothing but it is set of test obligations. Okay, uh, so in order to understand adequacy criteria, you have to understand about test obligation. Okay, test obligation is nothing but I am repeating it again. It's a partial test case specification wherein you are focusing on one of the factor or one of the properties and you are making it as important as to carry out thorough testing. That is what I call it as test obligation. Okay, adequacy criteria it will consist of set of test obligations. One, I can say that a particular test suite satisfies an adequacy criteria. There are certain conditions in order to prove that a test suite is adhering to the adequacy criteria. One of the condition is all the tests must succeed. Succeed means they should be in the status called pass. All the tests that you have defined should be in the state of something called pass mode. Okay, there shouldn't be anything called fail. Okay, then every test obligation in the criteria is satisfied by at least one of the test cases in the test suite. Okay, this is, then only I can call it as a test suite. Test suite is nothing but it will have set of test cases, will satisfy an adequacy criteria if and only if all the tests are succeeded and every test obligation in the criteria is satisfied by a test case, one of the test cases in the test suite. One proper example for this is you already have studied statement coverage. I was mentioning about this example. Okay, the adequacy criteria for statement coverage is satisfied by the test suite S for program P, specific program P, if each executable statement in the P is executed by at least one test case in test suite S. And the outcome of each test execution was pass. This is a simple example that you can understand adequacy criteria. Okay, consider simple statement coverage. Okay, adequacy criteria. When I can say that statement coverage is satisfied by adequacy criteria is satisfied by the statement coverage is I have a test suite called S and the program under study is P. Okay, if each executable statement in the P is executed by at least one of the test cases which you have defined in the test suite S. And one more condition is the outcome of each test execution is pass. Okay, this word is very important. You will not be having a status called fail here. Okay, please remember whenever you perform testing, okay, the outcome has to be pass. The outcome has to be passed here. Okay, then only I can say that statement coverage is adhering to the adequacy criteria. That's why we were defining adequacy criteria for each of the techniques. Adequacy criteria for statement coverage is each of the statement is executed at least once. In other words, I can put like this. Okay, that is the statement coverage adequacy criteria is satisfied by the test suite S for program P. Okay, if each executable statement in the P is executed by at least one test case in the S and outcome of each test execution was passed. Then we have something called satisfiability. Okay, that is again it is related with infeasibility problem. Sometimes there will be no test suite which will satisfy the adequacy criteria. It happens in the real world scenario. Okay, you do not have any test suite which will prove the adequacy criteria, which will adhere to the adequacy criteria. Okay, such a case, the test suite is not satisfiable. Okay, suppose we have taken up one example here. If z is less than 0, then they are throwing some error over here. Okay, z must be positive here. No test suite can satisfy statement coverage for this program if it is correct. Okay, if z value is a positive number, okay, what they are trying to explain here is that if z value that you have defined is a positive value, will this code be executed at least once? No. This particular code cannot be executed at all because the value of z is predefined and it is a positive value. Okay, and no test suite can satisfy statement coverage. Why? Because as the statement coverage adequacy criteria states that at least one test case must exercise that particular each statement in the program. That's why sometimes it so happens that there will be no test suite that is going to satisfy a criteria for a given program, and that leads to infeasibility. How do I cope up with the unsatisfiability? Okay. Uh, First approach is you have to exclude, okay, the statements or the unsatisfiable obligations from the criteria. Whenever you find that the test obligations are unsatisfiable, you have to exclude those from the criteria. Okay, for example, you have to modify the statement coverage as to require execution only of the statements that can be executed. See, whenever you get to know about the statements which are never going to be executed, the statements can be eliminated. Okay, and you have to modify the statement coverage to require execution of the statements that can be executed. Okay, and one more approach is that measure the extent to which the test suite approaches the adequacy criteria. That means you have to have the minimum knowledge, okay, or you have to have the quantitative measure to say that the extent to which a particular test suite can satisfy an adequacy criterion. For example, if the test suite is satisfying around about 85% coverage, okay, we can say that it is maximum. Okay, we have a traverse through the code and the statements that are covered by the particular test suite is 85%. Okay, that is 85% coverage is possible with this particular test suite. So you should have a quantitative measure over there in order to say how much it is adhering to the adequacy criteria. Okay, so an adequacy criterion, whether it is satisfied or not, you can express via a coverage measure, which is the fraction of satisfied obligations. And you know, how do we measure the coverage? Okay, associated with each of the techniques, statement, branch, everything, you have the formula for it. You can express it in terms of percentage in order to state how much they are adhering to the adequacy criteria. Okay, how much you can say that the coverage that you are going to define or measure, it is useful or harmful. That is, I have already mentioned the coverage has to be in terms of percentile. Okay, and wherein with the help of this coverage, you are telling how much the test suite is getting satisfied to the adequacy criteria or not. Okay, it can be a useful indicator. Okay, how it is a useful indicator? Because it will present the idea, okay, to the development team how much the particular test suite is possible to cover the source code in order to detect the faults. Okay, and sometimes it may not be the useful one. Okay, it is dangerous one. Why is it so? Because it is the approximate value that you are going to get to know that how much it is adhering to the adequacy criteria. It is not the exact value that you will have because some statements may not be executed. Okay, that's why the coverage is going to be the proxy for the thoroughness or the adequacy criteria. Okay, and it is very easy to improve the coverage without improving the test suite. What so happens is that, okay, you have framed the test suite, okay, and once you measure the coverage, it is very easy for you to just enhance the coverage without having to improve the test suite. Okay, that is about the coverage, how much it is useful and harmful. We have something called comparing criteria. That is how I can distinguish the stronger from the weaker adequacy criteria. Okay, there are two approaches here in order to compare the adequacy criteria. One is empirical approach, wherein I'm going to study the effectiveness of the different approaches to test in the industrial practice. Okay, empirical approach deals with the study of the effectiveness of the different approaches to test in the industrial practice, that is a reality. Okay, here it depends on the environmental setting of a particular organization, and you may not generalize from one organization to another organization or from project to another project. Okay, because it is specific to the organization or the project which is under study. That is with empirical approach. Okay, you are going to study the effectiveness of the different approaches to test in the industrial practice. And one more is about analytical approach, wherein you are going to describe the various conditions under which one adequacy criteria is provably stronger than the other. Okay, since we are comparing the criteria, adequacy criteria, you are comparing the two adequacy criteria. See, you may have the question, why we need to compare the adequacy criteria? Because you have various techniques, various approaches like statement, branch, condition, modified condition, decision coverage, and for each one of them there is adequacy criteria associated with it. Okay, and you have to know the effectiveness of each of these adequacy criteria associated with different techniques, and you have to arrive at the best one. In order to arrive at the best one, you have to compare them. That's why we are studying this particular section, comparing the criteria. Okay, analytical approach, it deals with describing the conditions under which one adequacy criteria is provably stronger than the other. What do you mean by why I'm using the word stronger? Because it will have more guaranteed outcome over there. You can be more sure about the testing that you have carried out, having more coverage of the source code, and which is helping you in detecting the faults. Okay, and one more thing that you have to know with respect to the adequacy criteria is subsumed relation, which we have studied in the yesterday's discussion. Okay, this is with respect to test adequacy criteria. Suppose I have two test adequacy criteria A and B. Test adequacy criteria A subsumes a test adequacy criteria on B if and only if for every program which is under study and every test suite satisfying A with respect to P also satisfies B with respect to P. It is very simple. Okay, you have test suite. Okay, you have test suite called yes, suppose, and you have a program P which you are testing, and there are two adequacy criteria A and B. See, please make sure that whenever I'm dealing with the adequacy criteria statements for each of the techniques, let it be a statement coverage, branch coverage, condition coverage, or modified condition decision coverage. The criterion, adequacy criteria associated with each of the techniques are different. Okay, when I can say part testing subsumes statement testing, that's what they are explaining via adequacy criteria. Test adequacy criteria A subsumes the test adequacy criteria B if and only if for every program P, every test suite satisfying A will also satisfy B with respect to P, which is program under study. Which is program under study. And the same thing they are giving, the example is been given over here, that is exercising all the program branches, that is the branch coverage subsumes exercising all program statements. Because if you are carrying out the branch coverage techniques, in other words, you are also exercising the statements within the program. Okay, that is what we emphasize on the word called subsume. Indirectly, you are performing the statement coverage whenever you are carrying out branch coverage. Okay, that is the significance of having the word subsume. Okay, subsume with respect to test adequacy criterion. Yesterday we had seen one diagram, theoretical approach and practical approach, where they had defined various techniques associated with the structural testing, and they had marked, okay, part testing, LCS AJ testing, okay, then you had statement, branch, okay. If you are performing one of the techniques, indirectly you are performing the other one also. That you are putting in another term called subsume. Okay, and one of the example can be if you are carrying out the branch testing or branch coverage, it will subsume exercising all the program statements. Then, what are the uses of adequacy criteria? Okay, it helps in test selection approaches. That is, it will serve as a guide in coming up with a better test suite. Okay, please focus on the word test suite. Test suite is set of test cases. Don't be under the impression that test suite is same as test case. No, test suite will consist of n number of test cases. So, adequacy criteria will help us in coming up with a better test suite. After that, it will also help us in detecting missing tests. Okay, it is not possible for us to carry out the thorough testing once if you design a test suite. There are certain chances of missing out the test associated with the components of a particular program. So it will adequacy criteria help us in revealing or help us in getting to know about the test which we have missed out. Okay, then after that we have something called the often in combination. What do you mean by this? Okay, that is design a test suite from specification, then you make use of a criterion to highlight the missed logic. Okay, often in combination means always the process in which you are designing the adequacy criteria is first you are going to design a test suite from the specification, then you are applying the structural criterion on the particular test suite to check out for the missed logic. Okay, these are the uses of adequacy criteria. Okay, any doubts here? Any doubts so far?